My history is one where if I if I knew what I knew back then, one of those stories, I think. Um, I didn't particularly enjoy school. Let's start very much at that. And I was always interested in customers, engagement, people, the EQ of people. I always felt that I was somebody that was quite in tune with how people were feeling. And I realised that what I was good at was listening. What I realised I was good at was identifying what people needed or wanted. So when I was talking to careers advisors and so on, they could see that my career wasn't going to be in academia. It wasn't going to be as a professional in the sort of terms of accountancy. It was going to be something that was very much people oriented. And leaving school, one of the things that I had the opportunity to do through a family friend was join a very good company called Cala Gas, with no experience, straight out of school into a sales job. And I was given a lot of trust to go there and try and make my way. And in Cala Gas, this was a really amazing opportunity because I sold big propane cylinders where there was no mains gas. That meant I had to go into people's houses at all different times of the day. I mean, it was not an easy job, let me tell you. Sometimes it was very late in the evening. You'd go in their house and you'd have to convince them, put in a 2 metre by 1 metre cylinder in their garden by their prize roses was a good thing. That they could put a screen in front of it. It could become a feature, let's say. But what it did is it gave me a real insight into people and how people would respond. Because in their own house, people act very differently, used to in the day, I would say, to how they did at work. This was their space, their territory. So those 7 years in Cala were really informative because it taught me not only how to build trust very quickly with people, but it taught me how to prospect. I mean, I had to knock on people's doors. I had to find out what product they used. I had to find out what supplier they used. So prospecting was an incredibly important skill that I learned whilst working for Cala Gas. It wasn't so much about account management then, because it was a one-off sale. But what that one-off sale had to do is it had to arrive, and the right equipment needed to arrive with the fitter to fit the tank. So there was a little bit of making sure that what you promised was delivered. So there were some very big lessons in Cala. And I must say, why did I leave Cala? Well, I applied for a job as a coach, sales manager, let's say. And they told me I wasn't ready. And I threw the toys out of the pram and said, right, well, that's it. I'm leaving. So I left. Well, not before I got a job with Shell, but Shell employed me. And in there, that's where I became really fascinated with professional account management. This is where we had engineering companies. I was in Sheffield and all of the engineering firms. And I had to learn about what I would call that industrial sale. Selling to a Yorkshireman was another life's lesson. Having to bring value, having to bring insight, having to be competitive, but having to have a plan where the values of the account, the customer and the seller were pretty much aligned. That was a pretty fascinating thing. And within Shell, one of the great things that happened in that company is that I was encouraged to better myself. I was encouraged to become a key account manager, looking after big industrial accounts, really sort of national accounts, which was fascinating. Looking at how big corporates operated and how consistency was important, and how politics in companies actually influenced buying decisions, and how departments were interconnected to delivering the overall strategy of the company. And that key account management piece was fascinating. I mean, after that key account management phase, I was then apparently qualified to become a sales manager. And I was very lucky to lead a business in the UK selling industrial lubricants. And within that team, I had responsibility not only for sales, but for marketing and for the technical teams. And this was a really great learning because I could see how a Shell business operated and how providing service and the levels of connectivity between departments really delivered great outcomes. I mean, that was a great job, and I learnt a lot of my sales coaching skills that I use today there, the methodology that I use, the techniques that I use. Because actually, the people that I had working for me in the Shell UK team were some of the most competent salespeople I had ever working for me. But they were quite senior in years, let's say. So that phrase about teaching old dogs new tricks, that was really where my sales coaching, I guess, became fine-tuned, helping people that kind of knew everything to learn something new and try something different. I mean, from leaving the Shell UK job, I then went overseas to Johannesburg and led the B2B business for Shell in sub-Saharan Africa. Now that, again, was a massive new learning. So now I went into cultural difference. And that was fascinating. And a country like South Africa, as an example, I mean, I can't imagine that you would think of many other countries that had such an incredibly difficult, diverse, challenging environment to operate in. And I got very aware of those challenges and worked within those challenges while still having to deliver growth for the company. And I think if you was to ask those, well, I know if you was to ask many of those people that I work with in South Africa as an expatriate, they would say that our time together, we made a difference. We took the business from a pretty healthy level to market share leading of about 70% in a key market of mining. And if you look at some of the recommendations and feedback I have on, say, my LinkedIn profile, many of those folks are account managers from that time in Africa saying I made a difference to how they sell. And that was really gratifying. But then after that, I was asked by Shell to take what I'd learnt in selling over my years and create a program for Shell. Well, no small task, just Shell. Well, this was operating in 40-ish countries, 2,500 salespeople, and to ensure that there was consistency and excellence in their sales approach. So over 5 years, I designed, implemented a sales excellence program, which is actually still in place now, which was all around how good companies become world-class companies and how good sales organisations become world-class sales organisations. That was a great job, and much of what I learned there I now bring into my Steve Knapp sales business, because it's the place where I am actually the happiest when I'm operating in a sales environment. That was a great job, and the learnings there were operating at all levels in the organisation. I've already mentioned cultures in Africa, but then you had global cultures. That was great, but operating at the C-suite down to the account manager, well, let me rephrase that, the account manager down to the C-suite. I think the account manager at the front end, I had to make everything we designed implementable, that would be the word. And it meant something to an account manager. So it wasn't from head office. It actually meant something, and they could do something with that process, with that tool, with that hints and tips, with that good piece of advice. So that was a really place where I learnt to bring my knowledge down to an even more granular and accessible level. I mean, after that job, I moved into operational excellence around billing and pricing. And I learnt there broadly more about the importance of customer experience and how significant something as simple as getting the invoice right or wrong can impact the customer experience, and how critical in today's selling world the customer experience is. So it doesn't matter how much good work the salespeople do, it could all be screwed up by getting other parts of the the process wrong. The price is wrong on the invoice. The invoice is illegible and not understandable. So I learnt a lot about that in that role. That time come to an end, and this is where I am today.